Hey class, this is Mr. Roberts, Shasta High School, and this is a follow-up video or the next step video for our work in dealing with two-dimensional arrays. If you didn't watch my video from Thursday of last week, I encourage you to go back and do that before we proceed with this one. Basically, what happened last week was we talked about how you can create two-dimensional arrays. And right here, I've commented out a lot of our work from last week, but you can see here I've created a two-dimensional array of integers, ints, called grid2, and it's got 2 rows. The first row contains the column values 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the second row, the one that sits below that, has the column values 4, 5, 7, and 8. And I asked it to show that grid. So if I was to let me comment out these. I think F8. Let's see, tools. Nope, it's edit. And F8 will comment and comment. So I'll comment those 2 additional lines, and it'll just show that grid. And now, what did we do with that? We went down and show grid looks exactly like this. So show grid receives the two-dimensional array of ints that we are to show, and I call that array to show. And we have this whole structure where we have a nested for loop, an outer loop that's dealing with our rows, inner loop that's dealing with the columns within that row. And you can see I'm going through and I'm grabbing the 0th row. Remember, everything starts at row 0 and column 0. So the first row is row 0, and I go through all the way to the array that I'm going to show dot its length. So when I do dot length on that, that's how many rows there are. And inside of that, you can see to get at how many columns I have to grab the first row. So I'm grabbing the 0th row and I'm getting the length of that. So it's an important thing to notice there. When I do dot length, it tells me there are 2, meaning there's a 0 row and a row 1, right? There are 2 rows. And then when I do the 0th one, I'm grabbing this row, and when I do dot length on that, it gives me that there's 1, 2, 3, there are 4 columns. Those columns are indexed from 0 to 3, right? This is column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3. There are 4 of them. So the dot length gives me 4, but they're indexed 0 to 3. So this quick algorithm right here will just go through and it'll display those things in the column. The other thing that we did last week was there's another way to establish a row where we wrote this method where given a one-dimensional array of data and how many rows and columns I want it in, it can go through and it creates a new array called result that has R rows and C columns, and we use this variable called pointer, and that's basically just the spot where we're going to be reading our data from. And then we just went through and did the same nested for loop structure inside of here. We're just saying, hey, our current result, the array we're building at the current row, current column, is going to equal the data at the current pointer. And then I increment my pointer value. This is just an aside. If you wanted to, you could put pointer plus plus right here. If you do that, you'd want to comment this one out. What this does, this pointer plus plus has a return value. Its value is the current value of pointer. So what happens when you do pointer plus plus, it returns its current value and then it updates it. So I could do that in one step. For clarity, I prefer to just say, hey, grab pointer, and then down here, then I'm updating the pointer. So I understand that a little bit better myself. Today we're going to be writing 2 methods. We're going to do one together, and I'm going to give you a second one that I want to write. And we're going to try this using an online editor. So those of you that have Chromebooks only at home, or a phone device or something smaller at home, and you're not able to run BlueJ, you'll be able to do this exercise as well. And what we're going to be doing is writing one method called getFlipped horizontal and another one called getFlipped vertical. And our goal here is to basically flip the values along, in this case, along the middle line, the line down the middle. We're going to flip the left-hand side to the right-hand side to the left. And then flip vertical is going to be, we're going to, along a vertical line. Ooh, I don't like how I'm calling those. Let me see. To me, get flipped along a vertical line. Yeah, so I imagine I've got a vertical line and I'm flipping the right hand side to the left, left to the right, and I'm going to call this one get flipped horizontal. I've been thinking about those backwards all morning. Um, so that's what we're going to spend our time together in this video, is just looking at how we could, what it would look like if we're successful, what exactly we want, and then we're going to write the code for that. So if you can imagine, we've got a two-dimensional array, and the first row contains the values 3, 8, 5, and 1. The next row down contains values 2, 6, 4, 3, and then etc., right? What I want to do is I want to switch this 3 and the 1. And then inside I want to switch the 8 and the 5. So when we're done, this should read 1, and then 5, and then 8, and then 3. So we're just going to flip it over like that. Part of me thinks, well, maybe we could just write the array backwards and that would be good. And that is true, isn't it? We could probably just do that, write the array backwards, and that would be good. The reason why I don't want us to do that is we're going to be writing algorithms where I want you to just take the left-hand side and put it on the right-hand side and leave the left-hand side alone. So in other words, this array could become 3, 8, 8, 3. So go down this path with me and see if you can follow this, because we're going to be extending this and using it to do different things. So we're doing a little bit of two-dimensional array manipulation today in class. So here's a kind of a tentative algorithm that I was thinking out. What I want to do is I want to travel down each of the rows in my outer loop. So I'm going to establish this outer loop that's going to go through row 0 all the way up to less than the dot length. So in this case there are 4 rows, so I'm going to do it for row 0, row 1, row 2, and row 3. That would be the 4 rows I have. And then for each one of those rows I'm going to travel along the first half of the column. So I need to kind of know how far to go. So I can see here I'm going to go in this case just for 2 of it, right? I'm going to just travel this down this first half of the column. And as I do that, for each one of the cells that I traverse, I'm going to use the cell location. I'm going to use the cell location and the total number of columns to figure out where I'm going to be reading from and where I'm going to be writing to. Now I wrote some kind of, that was just kind of a verbal description. This is kind of what my thinking is. So at a certain point in my nested for loops, I'm going to have a row value and a column value, and you can imagine I'm right here at the 3, and my job is to replace this 3 and this 1. I want to flip them with each other. So what I did is, first of all, I identified this one variable. It was kind of useful to me, called last column, and last column is the length of that first row, right, minus 1. So when I do this data get the first row dot length minus 1, what I'm doing is I'm getting this number 3, right? Because there are 4 columns, 4 minus 1 is 3. So last C becomes the number 3. And what that means is the last index, right, of that column is, in this case, the number C. And it doesn't matter, you know, the way I've written this, it doesn't matter if it's a 12 by 12 matrix or a 7 by 2 matrix. It doesn't matter. That's always going to be this last column value. So the index 3 is the last valid column. And the other thing that I said is that int s is equal to last C minus C. Okay, now let's think of what that means. Int s equals last C minus C. What I'm saying here is that I'm figuring out where this is coming from, but I have to be more general than just the last one, because I don't want to just do it for the last one. So what I'm saying is, if I do S is last C minus C, take a look at this. In the case that I'm talking about my first column, where this is 0, right? And then this is the number 3. What I'm saying here is int s, which I think I was intending to mean the source where I'm going to be reading data from. Int s is equal to last c, in this first case 3, minus 0. So that's talking about, it would be, that would still be 3, right? And you're like, well, why are you doing that? C and s are the same. Last c and s rather are the same. Well, I should put an int in front of this too. Well, the reason why I'm doing that is because if I come in 1 and I'm at column 1, what I'm saying here is that s is now going to be last c, right, which is what? It's still 3 minus c, which is 1, right? Right now, if I look at it, if I'm at 8, my c value, right, this column, I'm in column index 1. So this says last c 3, this becomes 3 minus 1, which is what? 2, right? So all of a sudden now I can see, oh, c is the column that I'm in, and s is the column I want to be swapping with, right? So I'm identifying two variables here, and this is general enough that it's going to work if this went out, 6 columns each, or 6 columns each direction, or 3 columns this way, 3 columns that way. It's still going to be general enough that it's going to work for all of them. So if you look down here, I was just kind of pointing out that when I'm at row 0, right, this is in red, I'm in row 0 for both of them, s is going to be 4 minus 1, and it's always 4 minus 1, right? That's last c minus 0. It gives me the 3. So this is nice when when I'm in column C, right, when I'm in column 0, I'm going to be referring to this column, right? And when I'm in column 1, right, when I'm in column 1, I'm going to be referring to column 2. So this is going to go down. It's going to allow us to identify where our source is and where we need to read things to. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of what I'm going to attempt to do here. I'd like to go in now and go ahead and try to figure out this code. And I just want to say this, when you get the link from me today and you open this link up, this getFlipped vertical is already going to be typed for you. You're going to get the results of what we think about right now. So you're not going to have to type this again. What you're going to have to do is try to translate that and think about it to create this one called flipped horizontal. So this is the method we're going to call. It's called getFlipped vertical. And what I would like to do, first of all, is create a copy of the data that I was given. And it's kind of difficult. I'm being handed this object, and I can't just create a new reference variable to it because I don't want to manipulate this. I want to actually create a new two-dimensional array and then return that. So I am creating a new one that is the same dimensions as the array I was given. So you can say an int array result equals new int array, and then the two arguments I'm giving it is data.length. Remember, that's how many rows it has. And then when I pull that 0th row out and I call .length on that, that's how many columns it has. So it has this many rows and this many columns. And we're going to just do a deep copy of that by doing a nested for loop. So this is pretty straightforward. For int, and I'll call it r, and it equals, so start at 0. R has to remain, whoops, equal 0. R must remain less than data.length. Could have set up a variable for that, but I didn't. And then I'm going to increment R. Inside of that, I'm going to open, enter, closed. Inside of that, we're going to have our loop for our column. So for int C is going to start at 0. And we're going to go C is less than data, and then I'm going to grab that 0th row and call .length on that to figure out how many columns I have, and then we've got C++. Boom, enter, and enter. There we go. So inside of here, pretty straightforward. I've got everything, all the rows and columns are going to agree with each other. All I have to do is I'm just going to say the results at the current, oops, not result at the current row and current column is going to simply equal the two-dimensional array I was handed, right, as it was passed as a parameter, data, and I'm going to read its row and its column. So there we go. This will go through and it'll copy all of my row values and column values into this new two-dimensional array. Now that we've done this deep copy, right, what we need to do now is think about how we're going to flip this thing along a vertical line, right? So the left-hand side is going to go to the right-hand side. The right-hand side is going to go to the left-hand side. I want to, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to figure out the location of my last column. I wanted to know that. And I said this in my location of the last column. So I'm going to call it last C like I did on the notes I was handwriting. So int last C, the last column, is going to equal data. Go ahead and grab that 0th row. Whoops, not the lowercase o row, but the 0th row. And I'm going to call dot length on that. So that's giving me how many column values I have, and I'm accessing that by grabbing that first row. I mentioned this on Thursday that in Java you can, well, on the AP Computer Science test, right, you can assume that we have something called non-jagged matrices. That means that all the rows will have the same number of column values. And that's why we're allowed to just grab the first column, right? And I say the first column while I'm pointing at the number 0. That's what it is. I'm allowed to look at that first column and figure out, that first row and figure out how many columns it has, and that's going to work for all of them. Now, I don't want to stop there because I'm not saying this is how many elements that I want to know the location of the last column. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just subtract 1 from that. So if it has 4 columns, last C would be 3. If it has 12 columns, last C would be 11. So it's just simply how many column values we have. So now I can go ahead and go into my nested for loop where I'm going to set up and do my switching. So this is pretty similar to what we typed above, right? So we're going to have for int, and I'm going to call it row again. It's going to start at 0. And we're going to go row has to be less than data dot length and row plus plus. Okay, great. Whoops, great. Now we're into that loop, and I'm going to go close that loop. Now let's do our inner loop. So for, and then we're going to start with int C is going to start at 0. And C has to remain less than. Now we're going to do this again. We're doing our columns, so to figure out how many columns I have, I'm grabbing that first row, and then I'm calling dot length on that, and then C++. And let's close that. Okay, so now we are in the heart of our nested for loop, and what we're going to do now is we're going to attempt to here's what I'm going to attempt to do. I'm going to attempt, let me grab this here, in this spot into a temp variable. Then I'm going to say I'm going to take this value, I'm going to store it in this spot, and then I'm going to take the value in the temp variable and write it here. So if you think about that as a two-step process, 3 is going to get written off in some temp variable. So I can say here's a temp variable. The number 3 is going to get placed in this temp. And then I'm going to take this 1 and I'm going to copy it to where the 3 is. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to take this temp variable. So 1 would be here now. Then I'm going to take this temp variable and I'm going to paste it right here. So this would be 3. And yeah. Okay, that's what I'm thinking, anyways. Something just occurred to me, and I'm like, that's interesting, because it just occurred to me. I don't need to do this for all of the columns, do I? And I don't know if it would mess it up if I did it for all the columns, or if it would be okay if I did it for all the columns. because I think I only need to do it for half the columns. So I'm going to actually come in here right now, and I'm just going to say, I know that's going to be an int, and I'm going to do divide by 2. So if 7 columns, 7 divided by 2 when they're both ints would be the number 3. So that would do it for columns 0. Ooh. Yeah, let's leave it like this. We'll divide by 2, and I might have to think about this a little bit later. We have to revisit this if we don't get the results we want. So, yeah, it makes sense that I only have to do this for half. I'm just basically starting looking at the left half of my matrix, and I'm swapping them out with everything on the right hand. So why would I go all the way down? Because I think I'd be doing double swapping then. And I don't know if that would put the array back to where it originally was, or if it would be okay. I don't. Let's just leave it like this and think about it. So, the first thing I said I want to do is I want to grab that value that's stored in the very in the case of the very first time in this loop, it's in row 0, column 0, right? The very first one, and the one that I'm going to be putting somewhere else. So I'm going to say int temp, and I'm going to say that that is equal to the data. I'm going to read it from. Oh, okay. You know what? Well, let's just proceed. I'm going to read it from data at row and C. Okay. What's occurring to me is I'm doing this with two arrays, but I'm thinking like I only got one. So I'm going to read this data from the array that I was handed called data. I'm going to read its row and its column, and I'm going to go ahead and going to say now that result at row and column is going to equal data, and then so it's going to equal. Now I'm going to go read this from the opposite side of the array, right? So I'm writing down the left hand side, if you will, and I need to read it from the right hand side of the data. So it's still the same row, that's not changing, right? And when we switch down to do this for the other one, the column is what's going to be the same, and the rows are going to be switching, but the row is going to stay the same. And I'm going to read this now from last C. That's the maximum number of columns. That's the index. That's the location of the last column I have. It's index, and then minus the current column that I'm at. Okay, and then I'm going to say result at R. Whoops. Result at R and C is going to equal. Oh no, that's a mistake. I need to now write, because I just grabbed this value from this last column over here, or the column that I'm dealing with on the right hand side. I now need to put that value that I stored in temp back in there. So it's going to be result at RC is going to equal last C minus the current column that I'm working with, and that should equal temp. I'm disappointed in myself. I want to try this and see, but I think I've got some errors here. And by the way, that happens, right? No one sits down and they write code flawlessly the first time, especially me. So let's go ahead and compile this, and let's take a look at, whoops, let's see what we're going to actually do when we run it to see. So first of all, oops, let's go up to this thing. First of all, I think I've got an, okay, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to change this to to V, and let me come in here and uncomment both of these. There, and 1, 2, 3. So I've loaded up grid 2. It's got 2 rows, 4 columns, and I've asked it to show that grid. That's Thursday's method. Then I did a blank line, and then I asked it to show getFlipped vertically, right, along a vertical line. along a vertical line, get flipped vertically, and then I just sent it grid 2D, and I'm showing that. So I should see the original array, and I should see its flipped version. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to compile this, and then I'm going to ask it to run the main method. By the way, you'll notice I probably should have made these two new methods I'm doing private because we shouldn't be calling them, but let's go ahead and call the main method. And when I do, I get this disappointing result. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Look at this. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, and if you imagine there's a vertical line down the middle, the 4, right? The 1 rather went way over to where the 4 is. This 2, right, moved over here, and the 3 moved over. So it completely flipped this along this vertical line. Oh, and I thought it wasn't going to work. I thought this was going to be a disaster. So actually, I think, wow, how much time we got? We're going to be under 30 minutes. So this thing that we talked through here this morning, right? I tried to give you a couple ideas to think about as you're working today, right? It's kind of important that you try and have a plan. You think about what you're doing. Your assignment is going to be to do. You're going to be, instead of flipping along this vertical line, you're going to be flipping along this horizontal line, so that this cell is going to go down here, and this value is going to come up to the top. 8 is going to go down to the bottom, and then whatever is here is going to come to the top, right? This 6, this value is going to be swapped out with this value. So that's going to be your assignment. And I think if you go through and you think about it, and this idea about the last column and then the last column minus the current column you're working with, if you think about this, I think you can design an algorithm that's going to do exactly that, kind of flip it across there. So you are going to receive a link to onlinegb.com, and this project. But one bit of advice is as you work, this beautify button, I don't know how to modify what it's doing, but it did not seem like it made my code more readable. Like in BlueJ, when we hit Control Shift I, that's what I thought it would do. It didn't quite do that, so you might want to not use that. But if you take a look at what we've got set up here, whoops, I went ahead and there we go. So I've got grid 1, and I've set it up just like here, and I do show grid 1, and then I do print it out. Then I did everything else that was in that project. So here's a different array, and I said I wanted to create grid 4 to be have 4 rows, 3 columns, and then it prints that out. So if I was to run this, I should see that first column 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next row 5, 6, 7, 8. The next one, let's just let it run and we'll talk about it. Well, that seems like it's taking a lot longer than it should. I'm out in my backyard. Okay, so let's see. I'll bring this up here and we can see, yeah, we've got the first 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8. The next one I wanted 4 rows, 3 columns. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and there's 3 columns. And I'm just reading the 2, 5, 6 for my first row, and then 6, 8, 10 the second row, and you can see it's down there, it's the same. And then it's reading the 5, 12, 1, and then the 0, 0, 3. This 5 and 7 are left over and they weren't used at all. So I think you can kind of see how this is going to work. We just code in this window, compile, run it, and then it does it. The compiler seems like it does a pretty good job of doing some error identification for us. Now the two methods that the method that we just wrote in BlueJ is here, and I don't like how this feels like this should be over here. Public static, return an array, a two-dimensional array of ints, get flipped vertical, and then it basically receives the two-dimensional array called data. So everything that we just did is sitting right here. You can look at that. Down below, right, is get flipped horizontal, and this is what you're going to need to write. So let's come in here and just make sure that that method works. I don't want to hand this code off and say, oh, Mr. Roberts, what you sent us didn't work. So let's just double check that. First of all, we don't need any of these things. So I'm going to comment out this line, comment this out, comment this out. So we can just focus on the things we're focused on. So I want to do another call to show grid, but the grid I want to show is not grid 1. I want to show grid 1 after I do the flip, here's what I like. Watch this. If I start typing FLIP, there, oh, that's great. See, it says, yeah, it's a local method. It's somewhere down below. And I want to call flipped vertical. So flip along a vertical line. And I need to send that a two-dimensional array. So I'm going to send it grid 1. That's closing the parentheses for the sending. That's closing the parentheses for the call to show, and then a semicolon there. So if I run this now, I should see both the original grid print and the flipped grid print. And I'll just bring this up here. You can maximize these, but you can see, yeah, here's my original 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you can see the flipping does happen, right? The 4. Yes, it does. The 4 goes to the first spot, the 1 goes to the last spot. So this is the flipped version below. So that seems to be working just fine. So let's go ahead and have me copy the link and then show you what you can expect once you follow the link on your end. Okay, so I went ahead and opened a new web browser. I'm browsing as a guest, and I opened the link that you're going to get. And you'll notice that, first of all, you can hide elements of this ID, so I'm going to close that. Also, there's settings here. You know, I can't see things unless it's the largest possible font. Well, that's not that large. And there's a dark mode and some other things here you can change. But what you're going to notice is if you run the code, it's going to run exactly the way I did in the demo. But you're going to say to yourself, Mr. Roberts, how in the world do I add to it the new code that I need to add to it so that I can turn it back into you? Let me see. I'm running the code first. I want to see if it actually runs correctly, the link that I'm sending you. This is in real time. Oops, lost connection to the server. Okay, Mr. Roberts. Let's try that again. Okay, to make this happen, I had to run in closer to my Wi-Fi router. But you can see, yeah, the link that I sent you did work, and everything that we talked about is here, including the method that you need to write. So the question is, well, how are we going to write the method? Well, if you notice here, there is a option that says fork this. What that means is like this is going to be your base code, but you're going to go on and you're going to add something to it. So we're going to go ahead and hit fork this. And as soon as you do this, it's going to ask, I'm pretty sure it's going to ask for a username and password. Well, it didn't actually require me to log in, did it? I hit fork this, and basically it did give me all these things where I can now run, debug, and test this. My recommendation is that you create an account and log in, and I believe you might be able to use your school district account to log into GitHub, but I would look at some of their options and do this. But it also appears that if you go ahead and just edit the code below, and when you just click share, right? Let me click share. It's going to create this share code. If you send this link to me, right, you're going to copy and send this link back to me, you um, I think that I'm going to be able to open up and look at your code where you left it off at. So that's going to be that's going to be my thought, right? So we're going to go with that. So let's try that today, and we may have to adjust and do something different tomorrow. But let's give that a try. All right, this is Mr. Roberts. I'll see you at 1 o'clock today if you've got any homework questions. Have a good afternoon. Good morning.